Imagine for a moment that you are at the helm of a massive production empire. You're casting steel, managing giant chemical reactors, or manufacturing millions of high-end automobiles every year. I am talking about those fundamental cornerstones, those massive gears that built the modern world. You are in Germany, the economic engine of Europe, the fortress of unshakable engineering and efficiency. But the year is 2023. You step onto your factory floor, and all you hear is a deafening silence. This is not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning. This is the hum of a bankruptcy, the closing of an era. Your factory has shut down, but not because you ran out of customers or because your workers are on strike. You shut down because you can no longer afford to keep the lights on, to pay the bill for the electricity that turns those machines. Welcome to the Energiewende, the famous energy transition. This journey was supposedly going to lead to a utopia of wind, sun, and guilt-free clean electricity. Politicians in Berlin promised us a green miracle. Germany has spent more than $500 billion, exactly $500 billion, in the last decade to build this utopia. Just think about what could have been done with $500 billion. And what did they get in return for this massive mountain of cash? The most expensive electricity in the developed world, a dying industry, and the darkest, most tragicomic irony of history. Right now in Germany, they're tearing down wind turbines built in the name of saving the environment and turning their sites into massive coal mines. Yes, you heard that right. To protect the green, they are demolishing the propellers and extracting the dirtiest coal. Today, we are going to dissect the most expensive, most unnecessary, and most own goal of modern economic history. We will see how hubris, geopolitical blindness, and uncontrolled panic led a superpower into a trap set by its own hands, an empire's energy suicide. Fasten your seatbelts. This will be a bumpy, dark, and quite costly journey. To understand how we reached the edge of the cliff, we must go back to the year 2010, to those days when everything still seemed under control. At that time, Germany was led by Angela Merkel, a physicist with a PhD in quantum chemistry. As a scientist, Merkel had made a rational decision to extend the operating lives of Germany's nuclear power plants. In those years, Germany's energy mix was a gold standard for the rest of the world. Nuclear, coal, and renewable energy were in perfect balance. Nuclear power provided 25% of the country's baseload electricity. It was reliable. It did not emit carbon. It was stable. And most importantly, it was extremely cheap. The installation costs of the plants had long been paid off. The plan was logical. Slowly increase wind and solar capacity over decades while using nuclear as the unshakable bridge of this transition. However, on March 11, 2011, the Earth shook on the other side of the world in Japan. The tsunami disaster at Fukushima caused a massive eclipse of logic in Germany, 5,000 miles away. The tragedy occurred in one of the most dangerous regions in the world seismically, floating on earthquake faults. Germany, on the other hand, is not a place famous for its tsunamis or devastating earthquakes. Reason and logic would tell you to conduct a safety review of existing plants, perhaps check the backup generators. But politics never runs on logic. Politics runs on emotions, votes, and fear. The German public was caught in a wave of terror fueled by the mainstream media and the Green Party. Die Grünen, the Green Party had been defending anti-nuclearism like a religion since the Chernobyl disaster in the 80s, and this was their "we told you so" moment. So, what did that physicist chancellor do? Did she look at the data? Did she consult her engineers? Did she calculate the baseload needs of the world's fourth largest economy? No. She panicked. Or worse, She made a massive political maneuver that cast aside everything rational to save her coalition and her political future. Just days after Fukushima, Merkel announced the Atomausstieg, the nuclear phase-out process. Why is this a $500 billion mistake? Because building wind turbines alone is expensive. But building wind turbines to replace nuclear plants that are already running perfectly is absolute economic suicide. You are not adding capacity, you are just burning billions of dollars to stay in place, to maintain your current energy level. Between 2010 and 2020, the German people and industry paid the highest prices in the world on their electricity bills under the name of the Green Energy Fund. But what was the result? Germany's carbon emissions barely moved a millimeter for 10 years. Why? Because when the wind didn't blow and the sun didn't shine, which happens very often in the gray weather of Northern Europe, they couldn't turn the nuclear plants back on. Instead, ironically, they started burning lignite coal, the dirtiest, most carbon-intensive fossil fuel in the world. They killed the world's cleanest baseload power for the sake of protecting the environment, and as a result, they were condemned to that sootiest, blackest rock beneath the ground. You killed nuclear, and you ideologically declared coal as the enemy. You have wind and solar in your hands, but these are sources that produce energy only when they feel like it. For windless and dark winter days, what the Germans called Dunkelflaute, you needed an urgent plan B. This is where that mysterious and dangerous dealer entered the stage, Vladimir Putin. Germany blindly convinced itself of that famous fairy tale called Wandel der Handel, or change through trade. Politicians in Berlin thought that the more gas they bought from Russia, the more their economies became intertwined, the faster Russia would transform into a liberal democracy. We wouldn't go to war with our best customer, would we? They said. This line of thinking led to the construction of Nord Stream 1 and 2, massive pipelines running under the Baltic Sea. These pipes were meant to pump cheap Siberian gas directly into the veins of German industry. This wasn't just trade, it was a drug, and Germany became completely addicted to this low-cost poison. By 22% of the natural gas powering all of Germany's industry was coming from a single source, Russia. The entire profit models of giants like BASF, Bayer, and Volkswagen were built on the assumption that this cheap gas would flow forever, and that Russia would never turn off the valve. But didn't the warnings come? Oh, they came loud and clear. The Poles warned them, the Ukrainians warned them, and the Baltic states practically stood at their doors every morning shouting, "This is a geopolitical trap. You are handing the Kremlin the kill switch to your economy." Remember, in 2018, at the United Nations General Assembly, then U.S. President Donald Trump said, "Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course." At that moment, the cameras focused on the German delegation. Do you know what they were doing? They were laughing. They were mocking Trump in front of the cameras, in front of the whole world. They looked at each other as if to say, "Listen to this idiot," believing they were the only ones who understood high-level European diplomacy. In February 2022, when Russian tanks crossed the Ukrainian border, those laughs vanished in a second. Change through trade diplomacy began to look less like a sophisticated strategy and more like a suicide note. When sanctions hit, when Russia throttled the valves one by one, and when those multi-billion-dollar pipelines mysteriously blew up at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, Germany was caught in the middle of a blizzard without a single stitch of clothing on. Gas prices didn't just rise, they went vertical. Prices in the spot market increased by more than 1,000%. Think of that factory owner we mentioned at the beginning of the video. The energy bill jumped from $1 million a month to $10 million. No company can absorb this. You cannot pass this cost on to your customers who are buying their steel from China or the US, where energy is as cheap as water. The German government lashed out in a total panic. They dumped $30 billion in cash just to save the energy giant Uniper from bankruptcy. They spent hundreds of billions of euros more to subsidize energy bills to prevent the public from rioting in the streets. This is where the trap snapped shut completely. Germany had no backup power because it had closed its nuclear plants. It had ideologically excluded coal. And gas, the only bridge fuel it relied on, suddenly turned into an enemy weapon. Economy Minister Robert Habeck from the Green Party had to go on a humiliating world tour, bowing before the Emir of Qatar to beg for liquefied natural gas, LNG, to replace Russian gas. The most painful part is this: the LNG coming by ship was far more expensive than the Russian gas coming through the pipeline, because you had to freeze that gas, transport it across the ocean in giant tankers, and reheat it here. This meant the permanent disappearance of that secret advantage that made the Made in Germany brand a global giant: the ability to blend high quality with cheap energy. Cheap Russian hydrocarbons had actually been secretly subsidizing German industry for years. Now that subsidy is gone, and the cracks in the foundations of the German economy are turning into impassable, massive canyons. The real cost of this energy trap isn't just high bills. The real price is the silent disappearance of a whole nation's industrial heritage. If you really want to see the scale of this destruction, don't look at dry statistical tables. Look at Ludwigshafen. This is the fortress of BASF, the world's largest chemical producer. This single industrial site alone consumes as much natural gas as the entire country of Switzerland. For decades, this was the beating heart of the German economy. It spread the Made in Germany stamp to the whole world by transforming cheap Russian gas into fertilizers, plastics, and high-tech chemicals. But in 2230, that heart started to skip beats. When BASF management announced they would permanently downsize their operations in Europe, the global economy was shaken. Thousands of people were laid off, and massive facilities were sealed shut. So, where is that multi-billion-dollar investment going? The answer is very clear: China. BASF is building a massive $10 billion complex in Zhanjiang, China. Why? Because in China, there is energy. Energy is cheap, and the government there doesn't try to put you on trial in environmentalist courts just because you use that energy. And BASF is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the mass exodus of German engineering. Miele, famous for its indestructible washing machines, is moving production to Poland. Volkswagen, the crowned king of the German automotive industry, is discussing building its next battery factories in the USA and Canada. Economists call this structural change in sterile terms, but its real name is deindustrialization. Germany is an export economy. It doesn't have Facebook or Google. It produces things you can touch. If you take away this ability, all that remains is a very expensive museum with good beer. Germany is like a man who sets his own house on fire to give his neighbors a lesson in fire safety. The house is burning, but Berlin is still celebrating, saying, "We are reaching our targets." Now, let's go a bit deeper, to the point where technical incompetence reaches its peak. Germany has a massive geographical problem. The wind blows in the north, where the sea is, but the massive factories are located in the south, in Bavaria. You need giant highways, high-voltage transmission lines, to carry this power from north to south. The most critical line is named Südlink. This line, planned to be the main artery of the energy transition, was supposed to be ready by 2002, exactly when the nuclear power plants were being shut down. The reality, however, turned into a total bureaucratic hell. The project became locked due to endless lawsuits, environmental hurdles, and not in my backyard, NIMBY protesters. The government agreed to bury the cables underground, which tripled the cost and delayed the project by years. The new completion date? Maybe 2028. So, what happens today when a storm breaks out in the North Sea? An incredible amount of power builds up in the north, but you have no way to send it to the south. The grid becomes overloaded. To prevent a blackout, grid operators tell the wind farms to flip the switch and shut down. This is the crucial point. Those wind farms are paid billions of euros in compensation for the electricity they did not produce. Technically, this is called redispatching, but I call it ghost electricity. In 2002, German consumers paid exactly 4.2 billion euros just for wind turbines to stand idle. Think about it. You are paying for propellers that aren't turning in the north. Meanwhile, because that power cannot reach the south, you are firing up coal and gas plants at full capacity so the factories in the south can keep running. You are paying twice. Once for the green energy you didn't get, and once for the dirty energy you had to use instead. This is an embarrassing management fiasco for a nation built on efficiency. The heat pump rebellion. War in the basement. By the time 2023 arrived, the German government realized something. After closing nuclear plants and burning coal, their carbon footprint looked disastrous. They needed a new success, and this time they set their sights directly on the citizens' basement. Introducing the Heizungsgesetz, or the heating law. Economy Minister Robert Habeck tried to force through a law banning new oil and gas boilers. What was the alternative? Heat pumps. Heat pumps are wonderful technologies, but there's a catch. They only work efficiently in modern, well-insulated homes. However, most German houses are old and their insulation is terrible. For a retiree to install a heat pump in a 1950s house means ripping up floors, replacing radiators, and re-insulating all the walls. The cost? Anywhere between 20,000 and 50,000 euros. This move by the government felt less like an incentive and more like a forced confiscation. When retirees realized they would have to go into debt for the rest of their lives just to stay warm in winter, the people took to the streets. This law did not save the climate, but it boosted the far-right AfD party to the top of the polls. The public panicked and bought thousands of new gas boilers before the ban kicked in. In other words, while the government wanted to reduce carbon, they condemned people to fossil fuels for another 20 years. This is one of the most painful lessons in economic history on how not to make policy. If you ignore the economic reality of the citizen and impose ideology, the result is frustration. Today, the German government proudly says, our emissions are at their lowest level in 70 years. And technically, they are right. But why did they drop? Was it thanks to magnificent wind turbines? No. They dropped because factories stopped production. When industrial production decreases by 20%, carbon emissions naturally decrease as well. This is like losing weight by cutting off your leg. You weigh less on the scale, but you are dying of blood loss in the bathroom. Germany is currently producing some of the dirtiest electricity in the world because when the sun doesn't shine, they have no choice but to cling to lignite coal. While its neighbor France has a pristine grid thanks to nuclear, Germany has become the biggest polluter in Europe despite its claim of being a green leader. A German charges his electric vehicle, bought to save the world, with electricity that is 8 times dirtier than the electricity a Frenchman uses. Why? Because Berlin refuses to accept that nuclear energy is zero carbon. As we enter 2026, the German model is now broken. The formula of cheap energy and high-quality exports has collapsed. Countries like India, Vietnam, and even Poland, which is returning to nuclear, look at Germany and say, we are not going to do what you did. They care about reliability, baseload energy, and price. They know that an economy cannot run on ideology. Germany wanted to be a North Star for the world. Instead, it became a laboratory rat for what not to do. Germany has shown the world, in the most expensive way possible, that a modern industrial economy cannot be run solely on intermittent energies dependent on the weather. If you let ideology drive the bus, don't be surprised when it drives it off a cliff. Germany spent $500 billion to learn this lesson. Hopefully the rest of us can learn it for free. Thanks for watching. Should Germany reopen its nuclear power plants? Or is it too late for everything? Let's meet in the comments.